Hey, Aaron.
Oh,
On
hey,
the
Chris.
call there. Okay. You all set to do some note taking?
Yep, I'm hopping on the drive right now.
Awesome. Hello, Beth. Good to see your,
Hey,
good to
Chris.
see your name.
Yeah.
Welcome to Russ Vanover for speaker, as your picture would suggest. Hi, Jill. Welcome.
Hi there, thank you.
We still have a few people expected, so we'll just wait a couple moments for people to join. Welcome, Steve and Graham. Glad to see you're joining us. We're still waiting for a few others to arrive. Welcome, Mira, from the city of Kent.
Oh, hi.
We're still waiting for a few others to arrive, so we'll just hold tight for a second.
Okay.
Welcome, Jeff from Carbon Innovations and Graham from Passive House Institute of the United States. We're still waiting for a few people, so just hold tight. I will say, just as we're waiting here, I know folks are probably working from home in the coronavirus pandemic lockdown that we all find ourselves. And there's no obligation, of course, to show us your face and the inside of your house. But I have to say, for one, I miss other people's faces because I've been holed up in my apartment for so long, and so if you do want to, like have a little more personal interaction, it'd be lovely to see you. All you have to do is click the video link or the start video down in the bottom corner of the control panel. Yeah. Welcome, Dan Goldenhouse from TRC.
Howdy.
And we have Tim also from Swiss Shirt Energy. We'll just wait one more minute before we get started. Just make sure everyone has a chance to arrive. Thanks, bud. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started, folks. Thank you all for being here for the second of our monthly meetings. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Yeah, I just got a signal that my internet was not working good. So just start waving your hands if you can't hear me for some reason. So anyway, I did want to welcome everyone and kick off the second meeting here. I just wanted to start off by sharing the agenda here. This is kind of what we're going to try to go through today, starting off with some general comments and talking about the goals for the meeting, thinking about it in a little bit more strategic perspective, like the overall goal of what we're trying to achieve with the toolkit. And then we're going to dive into reviewing some of the changes that have been proposed using our change proposal process, and we'll get into some of the details then and discuss a lot of specific issues. So that's quickly the agenda. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing now because I just want to see all your faces. Let's take a moment. Actually, I'm going to start off and give my let's take a moment and do introductions. And the way we'll do this is I'm going to call on folks so that we don't have a lot of people competing at the same moment. And I'll call on two people so that the second person can unmute themselves while the previous person is speaking. So let's start with Dan Wildenhouse. Please introduce yourself, your affiliation, and yeah.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I had to miss last month's meeting. Dan Wildenhouse with TRC. And I actually represent the Better Built Northwest program, which is designed to help utility programs align better with activities in the market.
Great. Graham, you go next, and then followed by Jeff.
Hi, Graham Wright, Senior Scientist of Passive House Institute, US.
Jeff Field with Carbon Innovations. And I'm presently working on a proposal in Portland to conduct energy efficiency, deep energy efficiency upgrades and electrification on low-income homes in the hopes that we can get something started that the Portland Clean Energy Fund can fund every year to do hundreds of homes every year.
Amazing. Great. Steve, and then Jill.
Okay, Steve Butler with MRSC, which stands for Municipal Research and Services Center. And I'm sorry that I shows that I have my video on, but I see a very foggy scene, which is similar to what Jill and you, Chris, experienced when we did Zoom earlier this week. So my apologies.
No problem. Jill, and then Sonia.
Hi, I'm Jill Dvorkin. I work at MRSC along with Steve Butler, and I'm a legal consultant there. And yeah, I've just kind of been looped in the last month or two, learning about this project. And yeah, it's a great project you have going on. And I'm here to provide what assistance we can from the municipal perspective.
Great, thank you. Sonia, and then Beth.
I'm Sonia. I am with Built Green up in King and Snohomish County, and just looking forward to hearing from everybody.
Great.
Hi, Sonia.
Beth?
This is Beth Jarrett. I'm with the City of Tacoma, their Green Building Specialist.
Great. Kathleen, and then Mira. Kathleen, you're muted.
Yep, sorry about that. Hi, Kathleen Petrie from King County. And Chris, thank you so much for coordinating this with Rachel and everybody, and glad to participate and help provide any input from county perspective. And currently I'm working on expanding and encouraging green building countywide plus.
Great. Mira, and then Tim.
Hi, my name is Mira Hubach. I'm with the City of Kent in their Public Works Division as an environmental specialist.
Excellent. Tim, and then Aaron.
Hello, everyone. Tim Stone with Swiftsure Energy Services. I'm an energy rater, and we provide consulting and high performance tests, as well as we're diving into a lot of these incentive programs and just trying to figure out how we can help most of these builders with high performance energy measures. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Chris.
You bet. Aaron, and then me.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Dumas. I'm with the Eco Building Guild and helping doing some coordination on this project and getting the toolkit updated.
Great, and I'm Chris Van Dalen. I live in Olympia and work with the Northwest Eco Building Guild as a policy specialist. And the working very actively on this toolkit project is part of a larger effort of collaboration with Shift Zero, the Zero Net Carbon Buildings Alliance, which developed the original version of the toolkit back in 2018 when it was first published. And then since then, we've got some additional funding from the Bullet Foundation, and that went to the Eco Building Guild, and we're using that to help advance the overall collective impact of Shift Zero by using some of our grant funds to get this toolkit updated with the latest and greatest on incentives, policies, and everything else. So thank you all again for contributing. I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to kind of put our work here together in perspective. Everyone, one of the things that Shift Zero was founded on is, we have a lot of different organizations involved, but and we have all different methods and different priorities. But the one thing we all agree on is that the climate crisis is an existential threat to the future of our planet. And so the toolkit is one way that we've chosen to try to get a handle on that by accelerating the using incentives and policy to accelerate the adoption of zero carbon buildings. Now, obviously, the climate crisis is, for the moment, taken a little bit of a back seat to the coronavirus crisis. And, I guess I'm a little concerned that our public officials will begin to lose focus on this and get distracted with everything else going on. And but I think it's a prime opportunity for us to look at this and think about how the coronavirus emergency and our response to it offers lessons for how we're going to be living in the future. Really, in my mind, this is like a dress rehearsal for the kind of disruptions that we're going to continue to see with the climate crisis. And the thing about coronavirus is that it's temporary. Every epidemic in history has come to an end at some point. And unlike climate change, which is going to be a permanent state that is going to get worse over time, it's going to happen faster than expected. And we're going to have climate disruption that we're going to experience in our communities and in our lives that's similar to what we're now experiencing with the coronavirus. We're going to see food and supply shortages, economic displacement, extreme weather events that really turn our worlds upside down in ways that we're all experiencing right now. So it's sort of like a practice run. And the other thing, of course, about it is that the climate scientists have been warning for years that climate change will lead to more virulent infectious disease, and it'll happen more often. So, coronavirus is really, in some ways, probably a symptom of climate change as well. So, it's really a time of opportunity and peril, but I do see some real reasons for hope here, because I've been watching here and seeing how our governments, not just in, Washington or the Northwest or United States, but all over the world, governments are responding, collaborating with industry, and people have changed their lives in big ways that, we never would have thought possible just a month ago, right? So it shows that we can respond in a coordinated and focused way, that people can change the way that they live. They can learn new ways of existing. And, I think it's just points to the fact that not only can we mobilize on a scale to address climate change, but obviously we must do that. And so the toolkit is part of that. The coronavirus doesn't stop for climate change, and or climate change doesn't stop because of the coronavirus. So now more than ever, we're going to try to keep this on the front burner. So that's sort of a call to action for everybody here to kind of get your commitment level up to see this process through, because at the other end of this, we're going to have a tool that will help us mobilize all of our local governments in ways that they haven't imagined possible before, using both policy mandates, incentives, and the tools and resources that we're going to make available through the toolkit. So anybody have a comment or reflection on my opening remarks?
Thanks for cheering us up.
Yeah. Well, I think we all need a little bit of inspiration as we go along here. Of course, a little bit of fear mixed with inspiration, right? That's a good motivator. So, all right. So for today, we want to get through this toolkit review as quickly as possible during the time we have. And so our goals here today are really to kind of understand the job as a whole. Like, what is it we're trying to achieve with this, and how do we get there from where we are now? and then secondly, to dive in and review some of these proposals. So I just want to make a few initial thoughts about this. Number one, to kind of talk about the review process a little bit and how we're going to be getting the content edits that we're looking for here. So for those of you who've already been in the loop, you've been seeing us send you a document called I'm going to go back to screen sharing here, called the working draft document. And in that document, it has some assumptions and instructions. Instructions about how we want folks to send us their comments and their suggestions here. So at the beginning of the document, it's got some instructions here, the version 2.0 working draft. It basically says use the form or make edits using track changes in the document itself. So the form it's referring to is this one. It's called the Policy Toolkit Change Proposal Form, where if you want to suggest a new section or a major rework or some specific edits, you could use this form to kind of give us at the staff level the opportunity to see what you want to propose and to use this form to kind of get some of your thoughts out on paper so the rest of us can comment and respond to it. We'll also be using a tracking system to keep track of the change proposals that we've got. Aaron has put together this spreadsheet, which is slowly loading. And there, can you guys see it with the yellow highlighting? Somebody give me a sign, yes? Okay, good. All right, so so far we've kind of identified these are some of the major change items that we want the new toolkit. First item there, the yellow highlighted ones are the ones that we already have some input from you guys, whether it's a change proposal form or a substantive comments or edits. So we initially had a good conversation with Jill and Steve at MRSC, and we reported on some of those comments and recommendations at the first call. The incentive section is more of an edit. We want to change where that locates. This group down here, numbers 10 through 13, financial incentives, that's one that Aaron has put together, and it's a change proposal, which we'll be looking at. Anyway, you can see basically that we've got all of these here. We're going to add more ideas to the list, and we're going to track them over time so that we get the drafts in and give people a chance to review documents in a timely way, hopefully with a little more lead time than I gave you for this round. Sorry about that. So anyway, that's just kind of how we're working on this, and from there, I want to just jump back to say that we're still looking for more proposals. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, May 7th, and that'll be the last chance to bring forward an idea that you want to put into the toolkit. And then for each of these topics, the ones that we're going to be reviewing today, as well as the future ones that hopefully you guys will be proposing, we need people on the team here to step up and really focus on what we need to do to get to a complete new section or a rework of this section. Really begin, we need some of you to step up and begin doing the writing and developing resources and citations. It really doesn't have to be perfect in this first round, but we just want something that we can respond to, and that's where these proposal forms come in. At the next meeting, we'll continue this process with reviewing the new proposals that hopefully you guys can help us put together in the interim. That'll be a month from now on Thursday, May 7th. We'll be looking at, again, more new sections, et cetera. And then we really need to, at some point, prioritize what all of this whole list, because there's only so much capacity that we have, and we need to kind of sort it basically what is really essential for the next version of the toolkit, what we would like to have if we can get it done, and then other proposals or changes that are optional that we get to them if we get to them. We have time, and really look at our capacity and who we have that's stepping up to develop each of the different sections and the new language. So just want to not overburden any one of us or all of us in a way, so we'll have to look at these during the next call to kind of prioritize and really figure out what we want to focus on and get done. But for now, we're just kind of collecting the ideas and getting them in a usable format. So one other thing we want to talk about at our next meeting, not so much today, is looking at a first draft of style editing. We'll have a couple of draft edits for one or two of the sections, so we can start to respond to kind of a revised style for the new version of the toolkit. One of the things we heard from MRSC was that we want to lean toward a more simpler language, more condensed, bulletized, with a more graphic style. So some of the text may get replaced with infographics. Some of them may be bulletized if it's a big paragraph, that kind of thing. So we'll be at the next meeting looking at some of the style changes that we want to see. So is there anyone actually on this team that has a particular interest in style and formatting, graphic design, that would be interested in collaborating with us on that piece? Okay, well, if you know of anyone or have an intern who is a marketing specialist or a style specialist, let me know. We can use their help. All right. So now let's dive into the actual change forms that we've received today. So I sent this out yesterday with a little bit of a apology because we didn't give you enough time to read it. So I don't know if people have actually had a chance to kind of quickly review this, but we'll walk through them individually and hopefully get some response to discussion. I'll try to be as brief in my summaries as possible so you guys can have more discussion. First of all, I kind of ordered the way we're going to go through these based on an idea of what a new table of contents might look like. Here's the old table of contents. Am I still screen sharing? No. I'm going back. Yes, here we go. All right. So here's the old table of contents on the right-hand side. And then I started to kind of sketch out what the new table of contents would be, where the italicized items are the new sections that we've already started talking about. So, so eventually we'll get all of these slotted in, and just want to give you guys a sense of how we're organizing our approach here. All right, so this is the fun part, diving into some of the changes that we talked about on the previous call and that folks have brought forward through change proposals. So a lot of these Aaron and I put together based on conversations with some of you. If you didn't actually put together a proposal and get it to us, then we might have gone ahead and created it. So this first one is a new section on existing buildings, which raises an interesting strategic question for the toolkit, because the previous version focused solely on new construction, and so I think there's a pretty strong desire, I think, for this version to have to expand that scope to include existing buildings. Graham and Court and others have all recommended this. But the thing about that is it complicates the way that the incentives gets described somewhat. So we'll definitely need a new section on existing buildings, or a section kind of talking about different types of buildings, both new and existing, commercial and residential. But the question is, are we going to try to weave this throughout the document, or just have it kind of concentrated in one section? So be thinking about that as we go through the suggested changes here. So, obviously existing buildings are a big part of our climate problem, and there's a variety of things we can do, both requirements and incentives, which will be needed to achieve the target. And this is, of course, building codes don't affect existing buildings, at least not the way they're currently operating. So we'll have to look at other mechanisms to address existing buildings. So I've made a quick list here of potential strategies that could apply to existing buildings, but I guess I would like to open it up to the group to discuss, like, how do we weave this in, and how do we focus the existing examples of how some communities have addressed existing building challenges when there's not a lot of great examples. So there are some, mandates and incentives that are out there, but let's open that up for discussion.
So one of the potential strategies that I did not see here that is already being considered and is, I believe, utilized or is going to be utilized in Oregon is actually requiring disclosure.
Feedback. Their crosstalk or feedback happening.
Yeah, you're having a little bit of a garbled. Is there any kind of background noise, Sonia?
Ironically, I can hear Sonia better than I can hear Chris.
Oh. Thank you for letting me know. I think Sonia might have been someone else that needed to mute. So go ahead, Sonia.
Okay. So one of the strategies of missing from this list is disclosure. That is either at time of when it's built or at time of sale. I know that there is a state bill that has been put forth for, I believe it's commercial buildings. I know that City of Bellevue is looking at it right now as far as a potential item in their kind of environmental update. And so that would be basically a mandate that you are required to disclose or at least benchmark your energy performance. And that may be, you know, there's that whole issue of you can't really regulate what you don't know is like, you can't do anything without measurement. So we need to start with measurement maybe, and then start implementing maybe some of these other mandates. But just having the market know one building performs better than another is a really powerful tool.
Jeff, would you like to talk about this? Jeff has probably done a lot more work on this than most of us, and related to Portland. Maybe you're muted, Jeff?
Yeah, I muted myself. I'm quite familiar with this on the residential side. I don't really have any specific knowledge about how it's being done on the commercial side. I know generally, but not specifically. And one thing I can say on the residential side is that it requires a comprehensive strategy to actually make a dent in the energy use of existing homes. If a city really wants to make progress on reducing the energy demand from residences, then they've got to do disclosure, they've got to do financing, they've got to have ecosystem of contractors who are able to deliver the services that are needed to make homes more efficient and to install efficient appliances and HVAC equipment. They've got to have coordination with utilities. You know, it just, the list is pretty significant of the different pieces that have to be put into place. And for example, in Portland, they passed the home energy score policy and did a good job of implementing it. And they've now done over 20,000 assessments. And it has had no impact on energy efficiency work in the city that contractors can see. And it's not surprising because in the whole home sale process, the report gets buried as just one of many pieces of paper floating around. There's no specific process for disclosing it to a buyer other than it's supposed to happen. And then even if you do see it and recognize it, buying as the transaction occurs, it's really 3 to 6 months later where you can influence the decisions about investing money in granite countertops or remodeling bathrooms or boring stuff like, you know, insulation and ceiling. So you have to have some program in place to engage the new homeowner after they've been in the home for a while. So, you know, even in Portland, I put a hold on trying to do more to increase awareness of in this area because I haven't figured out how to turn scores into projects. So that's part of what I'm trying to address right now with this grant proposal I'm working on for low-income homes. because that would just be, these homes would just get done. You know, it's just part of the PSEP money would just get spent. It wouldn't specifically apply to all the other homes that are floating around there in the middle or higher income residences, which could use energy efficiency work. So you got to take a kind of a comprehensive look at what's needed, and that's part of. I've done a little research on that, and so I can kind of describe the comprehensive approach that's needed. But I don't think it's very useful to do little parts of it. You got to put it all in place.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. I think that's good context, and you know, when we write up our proposal or write up our toolkit section here, we'll have to be sure to include some caveats about what it takes to make something like that work. One of the newest things actually applies more in the commercial sector, which is the CPACER law that hopefully will be actionable by this fall or early next year, that will allow commercial property assessed clean energy financing through the new PACE law that was passed. So that is something specifically that counties are going to be required to engage with, to adopt the policy and the criteria approval process, and the ability to put liens on the property so that the debt follows the loan. Do people generally know what CPACER is? Their thumbs up? No? Okay, well, we'll do a little bit more on that later. I don't want to go into the education session right now, but Kathleen, I was kind of curious from your perspective as county, how are you guys looking at this new CPACER law, and are you going to wait for the state, or are you going to try to move this forward more quickly?
We had our first meeting last week or the week before on it, and we were just really trying to familiarize ourselves with the ordinance language itself and kind of get our brains wrapped around how would we approach it. But, you know, we're definitely looking at it. And so, but this is in infancy, but there's definite interest. The exec's office would like us to consider it and to start to strategize around it and see what we can do.
Okay. Well, that law would allow for really attractive financing for both existing buildings and new construction. So that's one tool that the existing building section can refer to. There's also the City of Seattle that's got a variety of pilot projects that I think hold some promise, like the energy efficiency as a service pilot that they've got going right now, and the MEETS pilots. So, you know, those kinds of things are interesting to consider whether we should add them in. And then, Graham, it seemed like in some of your comments, you were leaning towards suggesting that Architecture 2030 could be a way that we organize, you know, their tools and their structure of a pathway for cities might be a way to organize our approach to existing buildings. Is that what you were intending in your comments in the in your section?
I went kind of a different direction. I mean, I still think the Architecture 2030 might be useful, but I kind of focused more on the equity lens, actually, in my first submission here.
Okay, well, let's come back to that in just a second. I guess my point about Architecture 2030 was that they have some tools that cities might be able to use to encourage existing buildings to get with the program. So, you know, those are the kinds of things we want to incorporate into this section. So I'd like to ask now, in addition to the people who are listed here, and I should also add, Graham, I think, because you already weighed in on this, Graham, that you wanted to see existing buildings included. Who else would like to continue to be in the loop with regard to existing buildings being part of the toolkit? Anyone want to step up and be part of that sub-team? Sonia?
This is Dan. You know, I'm willing to step in from the perspective of when code applies to existing buildings. From that perspective, so you're doing additions or major alterations, that's a different application, and it more closely aligns with what the toolkit already thinks about for residential. So being really explicit and expanding that section out to help people understand when their renovation, their addition, or their change out of pieces of their home end up triggering this other process that we're already pretty familiar with. Beyond that, I think it might be good for us to make sure we have someone from the state of Washington maybe involved. They've got their program for commercial buildings, starting with state-owned buildings, but trying to extend it over time to other commercial buildings. I forget the name of that program off the top of my head, but maybe someone from, maybe right now when they don't have anything else to do, we can talk someone into from Department of Commerce to helping out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's, if there's any other comments on...
I can help with existing residential.
That was Jeff, okay. All right. Thank you, Jeff. We'll make sure to keep you in the loop on that. Before we move on to the next change proposal and the comments, I would just like to let Rachel introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. Rachel with Shift Zero. So glad to see so many faces on this call.
Thanks, Rachel. Good to have you here. Okay, moving on. Graham, you started to speak up there, and I held you back a moment. But your main comment was that we should expand the scope to include existing buildings, mandatory measures, and just transition. And as you pointed out, I kind of edited your proposal form here a little bit to include, really to focus on the mandatory measures and just transition stuff that you had mentioned. So, you wrote that the urgency of the climate situation requires existing buildings to be addressed and to ratchet up mandates. I had put in a little bit more detail about, the fact that future mandates combined with incentives, such as what the Clean Buildings Act, can be very effective in moving the market toward, in a comprehensive way toward a future desired condition. So, yes, we want to increase current mandates, and we've worked on the building code quite a bit toward that end. But I also want to kind of, one of the things I would like to see in this section is that we talk about how future mandates, like we're gonna be at 70% below 2006 in the year 2030, and then how can we use incentives between now and then to get us to that place, that desired future condition. So that's the point I wanted to make, and I'll turn it back over to you, Graham, to talk about mandates and, of course, the environmental justice aspect of this.
Right. Let's see, you don't have my, okay. So you've just got, you've got, okay, yeah, there's like my edits. So this was a bit hasty, but I decided to try and edit it directly. And so, yeah, there's just kind of a couple of buzzwords here that I want to include, and that's like the idea of the ideas of a just transition and the new economy. And like just before this call, I stumbled across the website of the New Economy Coalition, and look at that, they've got a policy toolkit of their own, and they actually like talk a little bit about buildings. So I'm going to submit more about that. We have this little section about equity in our policy toolkit, and what I tried to do here with my edit was to kind of actually like move that right up front. It turns out this idea of a just transition actually goes all the way back to the 1970s energy crisis. It was started apparently by the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, when they saw that, oh gosh, maybe our oil jobs are going to go away here. So that's been around for quite a while, and it was apparently originally, pretty focused on what about the jobs kind of thing. How do we transition the workforce? But it has apparently, continued as a movement and expanded to like what about poor people? You know, what about, you know, anti-racism and that kind of thing. So it's evolved a bit. So I put in some snippets here from a couple of United Nations reports. There's a United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. They put out a couple of kind of case study reports about just transition, and
Great.
That's kind of where that comes from, yeah. And
so for me, Graham, this raised a kind of an overall strategic question. To what extent we want to use the toolkit as a opportunity to kind of you know, advocate a position based on certain values, or are we trying to, you know, give people the bare bones information and not make it too you know, there's going to be a little bit of a balancing act, because I know a lot of cities are deeply committed to cities and counties to advancing social equity alongside with housing equity and more climate-friendly policies. But we have to be careful not to alienate some of our audience if we want to have this toolkit be used by cities all over the state. So just open up some conversation about, like, how do we balance this and bring that equity and justice issue in without overbalancing the toolkit.
right, I'll just mention that you know, the rural areas are, you know, part of the frontline communities. You know, they're among the frontline communities. So yeah.
Maybe I could ask Mira or Kathleen to speak, or Beth to speak about this from a city perspective. Like, what, you know, put your hat on, like you're reading this for the first time and you're wanting to get some information on how to affect, you know, climate change policies. How do we present this in a way that you can roll with?
This is Kathleen from King County, and I guess where my brain immediately went to is King County incorporates ESG credits into the buildings that they do, which could be a component of the toolkit. And so I'll be happy to send those along to you, Chris. They've been touted as extremely effective, and they're kind of a national example. And this is the work of Nori Katabai at the county, and she would be happy to talk with this group and share kind of the background behind the credits. I think there's 8, and it's about workforce. It's about public outreach strategies, and but she'd be happy to talk more about it if folks would like.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and actually Kathleen passed those on to me, and I'm hoping to incorporate some of those or some form of them at some level. I haven't really dived into them yet, into our next update for our checklists for Built Green. So I don't know of the other certification programs as in-depth how they're addressing social equity, but I do know that it's somewhat in there. But I'm hoping to actually make it a bit more apparent in our certification specifically.
Excellent.
I don't have any specifics as far as what the city of Tacoma is requiring right now, but I do know that the equity lens is a priority for our city council, and that it would make sense to, it would be a lot easier sell for the city if the equity lens was incorporated into it.
One of the questions that's been raised as we've gone through this process with the toolkit is whether, you know, advocating for land use incentives and permitting, you know, expedited permitting and other things for zero carbon buildings, does that in any way compete with the affordable housing incentives that the cities use and need to use to advance affordable housing? How can we, instead of having any perception of competition, how can we turn that into a synergy where affordable housing and zero carbon, healthy, energy efficient homes goes hand in hand together? So I think that's something we want to address with the toolkit, is how to align our agenda with the affordable housing, align our recommendations with affordable housing providers, and find ways that they can work together. I mean, I'd love to find some examples where perhaps a city required all the affordable housing to meet a certain energy standard, or some other way of incentivizing both affordability and energy efficiency at the same time.
Right.
If anyone's aware of that.
Yeah, one of those UN reports I reference pointed to New York City's Green New Deal as a specific example of that, where they tried to get both of those things done, and put together a coalition to do it.
Yeah, the country of New Zealand has an interesting approach to this. Their energy code is it's not called their energy code. It's called their healthy building code. They have turned everything about their energy code and made it about a better, healthy living experience in your home. And this, in and of itself, is not directed to be connected to affordable housing, but it allows the conversation for the benefits for affordable housing to be connected to their code. So I just stumbled across that looking at some things for ductless heat pumps for another program, and just was blown away by how intelligently and well put together their code and all of its support is, but it's all focused towards a communication about healthy homes.
Which city was that?
It's not a city. I believe it's the entire country of New Zealand.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And they have some really great diagrams about ductless heat pumps too.
Okay, well, so of the folks on this call, let me go back to the form here so I can put your names down. Who wants to stay in the loop on the discussion about how we incorporate equity into this proposal, into this toolkit?
Well, also, one thing that was proposed in this is mandates, and as part of the stakeholders list, I will say that the Master Builders Association and the National Builders Association, or Home Builders Association, would actually fight mandates. So you would really want to work with them if you're trying to do mandates, to make sure that they aren't going to fight against you, but rather work with them as much as you can, because they tend to not like mandates. So while Built Green, like, we benefit from them, our, organization, the Master Builders, does not like mandates. Our members do not like mandates. So you would want to use them as a stakeholder to kind of help smooth that out if possible.
Yeah. I don't really understand, I guess that, yeah, the National Home Builders Association has fought like codes, and energy efficiency and codes for like a long time, as I understand it. And I don't entirely understand why. I mean, I sort of do, but I don't think they're thinking right about it, or like, again, like as part of some Green New Deal, it's like, what if there was like all shit tons of financing to do all this home renovation work? Wouldn't you be for that? So yeah.
It's not about whether we are for it. It's that our members are not all green-minded, and we represent those members. So we're a trade association,
wait a minute,
essentially. So
not all the Built Green members are. Or not all the Master Builders.
Green. I'm saying Master Builders Association. Built Green is a very small subsect of our membership.
Yeah.
So, for example, Master Builders of King and Snohomish County has 2,700 members. 555 of those members are Built Green members. So
that's not small, but it's not large either, right?
It's not large. We're not even half of the membership. So
I get the picture.
So let's to be clear on this toolkit that we are, I think, if I understand, we're not going to be putting a lot of information in here that is about future policies that I think some, things that, mandates that should be enacted by the state. What we'd rather be doing is citing examples of how communities at the city and county level have enacted incentives, and in some cases in combination with mandates. I think that's the way to frame it. Like, how can a mandate in combination with an incentive work to, and what examples and tools do we have available for that currently, rather than saying, we should all be pushing for a legislative agenda that master builders would disagree with. So I don't think that's the toolkit's job, and so we don't necessarily need to debate that in here. Just really how do we figure out how do we frame it. And so this is a good discussion. We should keep it going, but let's put some parameters of the discussion to focus on what the toolkit is trying to do, rather than trying to solve that problem for everyone. Yeah. So good. So if anyone else would like to raise your hand and have your name on the stakeholder list so you can be in the loop on this process, please let us know right now or later. I want to move on to the next section, if that's okay. All right. Zooming on down here. Thanks for all those great edits, Graham, and citations. Those were great, Graham. Thank you. So yesterday, Dan and Aaron and I had a conversation about a variety of things that his company may want to be involved with Toolkit and helping us improve it. One of the things specifically we talked about was the need for a section on utility incentives, which was I think briefly mentioned in one paragraph in the toolkit, but there's a lot more to say. So Dan, I tried to capture your thoughts here in this toolkit proposal form, and I understand just a bit ago that you did some edits on this, so we're not looking at your version unless I guess I could pull up your version if you'd like me to. Let me do that. I might have to change my share.
Yeah.
Go ahead and Dan.
With the fact that we only have 8 more minutes scheduled on this call, I don't think we have to kill ourselves to have a second version of this up.
Okay.
What we really talked about were a couple of things. One is that it gets really complicated unless you're talking about them in terms of case studies. It gets really complicated to link to every blessed utility incentive that's available in the marketplace because they change. And due to the fact that code is going to be changing, things like the baselines utility incentives are based on will be changing, and so what's available is changing. In fact, sometimes it goes even further than that. How they're calculated could be changing. With the Washington State Energy Code now, assuming it does actually go live and doesn't get postponed, has essentially a step code, voluntary step code built in on the back end. And that may be the new structure for utility incentives moving forward. So I think what we wanted to maybe think about instead is talk about the kinds of incentives that are typically available. So there's the prescriptive package style, there are measure by measure incentives, and then there are quote unquote performance-based or energy modeling based. Talk about how each of them are a little different and what they may, how they may contribute. Do the same, share how it's a little different between single family and multifamily for example, and then really point to where are the resources and the regular places you can go and how you can make sense of what's available. And I think if we think of it from that perspective, what we're really just doing is adding a lens to say the fight to build incentives based off of permitting or based off of other policy. You're not alone in that fight if you remember to look to see if there are other types of incentives like utility incentives available that may add that extra financial kicker to make it a little bit more of an appealing approach for a builder or a remodeler or whomever to take on some of these changes. So some of the stuff that Chris is highlighting as I'm talking, this is where I've added a few extra pieces, Chris. But this is kind of what my approach is. We did also briefly talk about the fact that, the people that effectively pay me to be here, Better Built Northwest, for better or worse, represent both gas and electric utilities. So when I say certain things, I sometimes have to say them from the perspective of we want the most equitable and transparent way possible to reduce carbon. And the words building electrification may never actually be able to be coming out of my mouth in the Pacific Northwest because of who my clients are, but strategic ways to reduce carbon emissions with the maximum diversity of options and taking into consideration the true lowest cost approach for affordable housing. Those are all things that will probably have to be considered in anything that I help write, just so that A, I don't get fired, and B, we're kind of representing to the point that Sonia made earlier. Sometimes you have to make an approach that doesn't inherently bring out opposition in a rabid manner. Just like trying to prevent ourselves from getting in a pickle at the NAHB, it's the same thing here. Talking about things in a way that does not intrinsically or inherently cause a gas utility to want to fight us is a good thing. So that's kind of my little pitch on what this little section kind of is about. You know, there's a subtext to all of this, which is that there are so many things that we have in common about we want homes to really perform well, even if the reasons are different. A utility wants it to perform well so they can claim savings for 45 years. We want it to perform well so we have a healthy, easy to live in environment for the homeowners, and we also want to see a societal benefit in terms of reduced carbon and contributing to the global climate crisis. So different goals, but maybe some of the same measures and some of the same approaches can be taken. So focusing on what's common and what kind of are the things that we all can agree are good is kind of the part where this section I'd like it to focus on if I'm going to be helping to write it. So that's my pitch. I would love to have anybody else who's got some degree of interest here, particularly my friends at the home certification programs, because a core part of this is how can these utility incentives align with the Built Green offering or a net zero program or passive house or what have you. So to my friends from those programs, I would say if you're interested, I'm interested in having you kind of work on that with me.
I have a general concern that I want to raise, and that is that I don't want to be involved in saying things that aren't going to be effective or that aren't clear or that aren't going to work. And we can't continue to deploy natural gas. Can't do it.
Yeah.
If you want to solve the problem, you just can't do it. So I don't, you know, you know, I don't know how to soften that other than to say that we can't have more natural gas if we're going to achieve our climate goals.
Yeah, I don't disagree. There's a difference, however, between not putting in more new natural gas and ripping out all the existing natural gas on principle.
Well, you're going to have to do both eventually.
Eventually, you will have to do both, but what can we do in the next 3 years could be having less new natural gas put in.
Yeah, I mean, now it's just talking. The strategy is clear, and as long as we're not being unclear about the strategy or intellectually dishonest is what I worry about. I don't want to be intellectually dishonest about stuff here. If we're going to tell, if the purpose of this toolkit is to enable cities and states, cities and counties to accomplish their greenhouse gas emission reductions in buildings, then you have to be clear about what's going to make it possible to do that. And it doesn't, it will require replacing natural gas with electricity. So
sure. It's also going to require replacing all of our current refrigerants that we use and heat. There's a lot to it, is my point, in that we want to take this first step. We want to make use of things that are available to help us get there. I'm not talking about making deals with devils. I'm talking about saying what can we achieve in the next 3 years, and how can we do that in the most cost effective and the thing that provides a social justice element, which doesn't involve ripping out the lowest cost fuel option for people, whether it's in business or living, that's the only way they can continue to provide heat and in some cases industry. So those are just different approaches, but I don't disagree personally with you at all. But I do have to recognize that the way that my business is structured and oriented, that's part of what comes with me participating on here, is taking the approach that doesn't get us in trouble.
You may want to recuse yourself just to not put yourself in an uncomfortable position then.
And that's a completely legitimate option if the group agrees that that's was what makes the most sense. I'm happy to work on this and to promote the things that we all agree: reduce peak load and reduce energy usage in homes and businesses. I think those things are all true regardless of the fuel type, and so I'm happy to contribute on those things. If the group would rather I recuse myself to be able to say the things that you want to say in a way that doesn't feel like you're cutting a corner or holding back on something, I can appreciate that as well.
Hey, I apologize, but I have another call to make. So thank you for the time today, Chris, for your leadership on this.
If I could just say one thing before you leave, Jeff, it's just that I would like to set an agreement for this, that number one, that we will kind of work toward a toolkit language that actually identifies, like Dan put it, like let's use this as our principle, that we want to use we want to come up with the most equitable and transparent way and cost-effective way with a diversity of options, and to reduce carbon emissions, and that is definitely going to include taking out natural gas in some places and in some ways, but in other places it might, we want to, can we use this as a sort of a principle of which we want to use to guide this, and and we can work out the details of what it actually says based on this principle.
Well, be clear about the time frame. This has got to be long term. It's because there are no policies that will come out of this toolkit being read that will happen within the next 2 to 3 years. They'll happen in the 5 to 10 year time frame. That's just how long it's going to take. So whatever we talk about, we have to be clear that what about the long term right answer is, and that's the concern I have. All right, guys.
I don't inherently disagree with anything you're saying, Jeff, at all. I think we all agree in concept with that.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and also agree that if we later decide that we want to take a little stronger position and we want to ask Dan to step aside, that he was open, we can have that conversation in an open and transparent way. And Dan sounds like he's just open to hearing that and deferring to the group if that's what we decide. So if that keeps it, that hopefully everyone feels safe and secure and heard here. And as we go forward, Dan's given us permission to have an open conversation. So thank you. We are at just after 3 o'clock. Sounds like some of you guys are going to leave. There are a few things I would like to touch on. The folks from MRSC are here. So if those who are still here can stick around, I want to give Steve and Jill just a second to reflect on what we're doing and any comments or suggestions you have for us at this point. Your perspective as a research center for all the jurisdictions of the state, it puts you in a unique position. Appreciate your participation.
This is Steve. I guess I'll kick it off, and then I have to get off the call myself. Sorry. I think this toolkit is very valuable, and I think the work being done will be even more so. And as we've talked, Chris, Aaron, and Jill and I, is just wanting to make sure that it's kind of covering the topics in a way and using language that local governments will be able to understand and again feel encouraged to consider the steps versus feeling defensive or worse. So that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Steve. Jill, anything to add? Good meeting.
Sorry. Yeah, just this has been interesting to listen to those who are more steeped in this process than Steve and I are. I've been highly distracted by the COVID-19 policy issues that are arising for local government. So just haven't had the time that I would like to immerse myself in this. But on a more basic level, I think the idea being that, just make it as digestible and sort of friendly to policymakers as possible. I think Steve and I stressed before that examples are great to the extent you can highlight what other people are doing either in the state or nationally. That gives, I think, local governments a foothold, something that shows them that they really, that this can be done. And yeah, I think it's just a great effort, and anything, and Steve and I were also saying that we have a, you know, an audience in the local government. So whatever comes out of this process, we'd be happy to help facilitate its dissemination and use throughout the state. So.
Perfect. Well, just to wrap up, I guess I would love it if anyone has something that's burning on their mind in terms of a future proposal that you want to bring to this group. We don't have time to go into further on the ones we have now, but I would love to hear briefly if anyone wants to suggest their proposals that you want to bring forward, coming forward, or how we might approach different sections here. I guess we'll have to work with you individually, but if anybody has anything, Aaron, can you identify any others that we are waiting on or expecting to receive?
No, I think we have most everything. I know there was a number that we were, going to go through again, kind of look through certain sections and see if there are certain reworks that need to be done on our own. But I know if anyone else wanted to contribute anything else, we were open to that.
I still owe you one, and it's in process. I started working on it, so you'll have it soon.
Okay,
what's
great.
that?
Thanks.
Yeah, I want to submit more as well.
Okay.
The one I'm proposing is already on your list, and it's already assigned to me. So I just didn't get it done with everything going on.
It's built green, not guilt green. Graham, yeah. So Graham, I did want to say to you that along the lines of the social equity and justice aspect of this, the lens that we're looking at it from, regarding the comments I had about integrating affordable housing and zero carbon incentives, I do want to have a conversation with the folks at the Housing Development Consortium, with Marty Koistra and Patience Malaba, who's their policy director, to get their input on how we can create synergy rather than any sense of competition or cross purposes with what they're trying to achieve. So if you would be willing, I'd love to have to be part of that conversation if we can pull it off. I'm having a hard time, as you can imagine. Everybody's really scrambling everywhere, but they haven't really responded to my outreach on that question yet. But when they do, I'll include you.
Thanks.
Great. So next meeting will be Thursday, May 7th, 2 p.m., same bat time, same bat channel. And thank you all for being here today. Any parting thoughts, inspiration, or fear?
I guess my one parting thought is, given that it's a toolkit, it may not need to be like completely internally consistent. There could be some options that would be like more aggressive or less less threatening, all part of the part of the menu of options.
That's another interesting idea.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but it was a little bit too heated in the moment. But the way that Built Green approaches it is that it's all voluntary. We have some that are really like high ambitious, super environmental goals, but we also have low hanging fruit that is more approachable to some. And we felt that, all of those options are better than the alternative. And every jurisdiction is going to be at a different place. So I think having a variety is more approachable and more applicable than just saying, oh, you just have to only do this because that's the only thing that gets us any impact. Well, I would rather have 300 cities do all like 3-star Built Green housing than one city who does 5, Emerald Star houses. You get better like impact, even if it's a lower amount, when you have just more done. So I think having it be a toolkit where it's designed in a way that you pick and choose, like what is effective for your jurisdiction, while also balancing the fact that we need to push people and make them feel a sense of urgency, and provide high scale options. But you also need to meet jurisdictions where they are. not everyone is going to have the political power that Seattle does, or even the resources. You need to provide some tools that small cities who may not have like a ton of resources can implement in their jurisdictions. And I think that's how we can kind of look at it internally, is like, we provide the options, it's up to them to figure out what works for them. So yeah, you can advocate like no natural gas, but you can also advocate like implement solar everywhere. You know, like there's a whole host of options, and I think we need to kind of let, you know, people find where they can fit it.
Well said.
Yes,
That's
thank
a great-
you.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, I was like that, like what you just talked about reminds me of our original toolkit discussions, you know, 2 years ago. That is the goal, that it's like this meets the rural community where they're at. This meets Spokane where they're at. Like that's supposed to be the goal of this toolkit, right? So we do need to remember that.
I had that moment when, you know, we have this one builder who in Seattle just keeps doing hundreds of units that are 3-star. And, you know, I always just am like, I kind of had a snobby moment where I'm like, come on, do 4-star. And Aaron, our director, was like, look, yeah, but they're doing it on they're doing on a scale that is more impactful than a builder who only builds a couple 5-star or like emerald level buildings. Like the impact overall is greater because it's just the sum of their impact. So I think that's sort of a perspective that we have at Built Green, is like, what's the amount of impact we can get with the resources that someplace has.
Right. Mira, from the city of Kent, you've been really quiet. Anything you would like to reflect or offer on this?
I just appreciate hearing what folks are saying and thinking about where our city is. Sounds pretty different from where other ones are, right? We don't have a climate action plan. We don't have an environmental or equity or social justice plan. So
we should add those to the toolkit.
Yeah.
Here's an example of a climate action plan.
Yeah.
If we could find one that didn't suck, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm thinking again, right, of audience and applicability to cities, and how it isn't just like an urban rural divide. You know, there are cities, again, like Kent. Kent's pretty big. It's one of the biggest cities in the state, but they just have different concerns at leadership level. And so, yeah, so I don't necessarily have someone to add right now, but I'm happy to be involved.
Yeah,
I actually appreciate that perspective, because I think I actually went to a graduate school that was all about sustainability. And I had to constantly bring into our bubble the voice of, well, not everyone is super concerned about this. Like, you need to kind of have that perspective of, well, what if a jurisdiction isn't super focused on this, or it's not a really high value concern? How can you build it into other places where they do have concern? And I think that perspective is really valuable. So I'm glad you're here.
And I'll just also add to that, when I was speaking with Chris before, it's not that necessarily because we don't have a climate action plan that seeing words around climate would be scary to folks. It's just that there's different things that are exciting. So that I shared, one of the goals of the city is, I think, to attract people to the city, to attract businesses, and to be a place where people want to live. So that kind of novelty aspect and exciting and attractive and aspect of like an, you know, 5-star building or a living building challenge, that's attractive to Kent City Council, is to get a building that people are going to want to gather around and put Kent in the headlines for good reasons. So there's definitely ways in which it is still appealing to the city. It's just maybe different buzzwords would work for us.
Interesting.
You know,
Yeah,
for
I think
better for
one of the-
for better or for worse, I'll say that's not necessarily what.
Yeah. One of the things you raised, Mira, that I think is probably should be a section or just discussion in the toolkit is how does all of this relate to your climate action plan if you have one, and if you don't, you know, how do we incorporate this into other plans that you have? Because you know, a lot of the policies that get adopted are actually preceded by plans, which are, you know, in a lot of communities right now, the climate action plans are being revised and updated and or being written for the first time. So having a way of you know, connecting the toolkit proposals and policy recommendations into the climate plans or other plans that are related would be valuable guidance towards cities, I think. So let's, Aaron, let's put that on our list. Climate plans and others. Okay, well, this has been a great call. I think we've got through a lot of stuff. We didn't get through everything, but and thanks for everyone staying a little extra so we could round out the conversation with some nice reflection. I think that reflection will be very useful as we begin to organize the overall document and start drafting the sections and how the tone that we take, the style that we use, the you know, the options that we present. So we want to keep that in mind. So that's good feedback. Thank you. With that,
Thank you, Chris.
bye. You're welcome.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now.